one by one across America.
Marty, but Maine first.
Maine first.
The rest of them got me for 20 years. So I am, that's true, I'm Marty Pottinger. I have been a theater artist and a contractor and a many things for years. And I figured it was 20 years to grow up, 20 years to do kind of activism and being a female carpenter and break into the unions, and then 20 years to really kind of put everything I had into theater, which I hadn't realized was such a powerful place to be until I realized it, and then I spent kind of 20 years there. And now I'm giving my, what hopefully is not my last 20, but my next 20, to this project called Art at Work. And it's the Art at Work initiative. Some of you already know it very well. It is putting the resource of art and the resource and the power that comes from direct creative engagement at the service of municipal government. And so what does that mean? It's putting the power of direct creative engagement into the hands of municipal government. And the intention and the reason for doing it was to, I had a sense from being so very old that we were headed into exciting times when the economy was going to do various versions of collapse, when social relationships were going to turn sideways and upside down, and we're out of all that, which is now a much more common conversation than it was 10 years ago. We will have a shot at the kind of transformation and a reconceiving and making new agreements among ourselves about what kind of society we want to live in, what kind of culture we want for ourselves and for our children. And we're kind of headed there. And so what I did was ask myself, personally as an artist, and someone who cares about the way things are going for everybody, where is the rubber going to hit the road? And I've had a long history with the unions, both fighting them to let people of color and women in, and also as a union activist. And I thought, well, the unions are kind of, they're in place, they're there, but they've obviously kind of been, corruption is contagious, and they've been contaged, and they've also been targeted in equal ways to the people they've been dealing with. And I also thought of municipal governments, and it turns out I've done several. I never really thought of it. You kind of do what you do, but it turned out I had worked with New York City with the Department of Environmental Protection in a major arts project. I had worked with the Department of Sanitation in a major art project. I had never really thought of it. I was just kind of doing what I was doing. But I realized, oh my gosh, maybe the federal government's going to freeze out, maybe the state government's going to freeze up. But the one kind of government, if government really is us figuring out how to make this a healthy community in the kind of scale that you need to think about epidemics, to think about roads, to think about electric, to think about basic services, human and practical, then it's really going to be municipal governments where the rubber's going to hit the road at this point in the next 10, 20, 50 years, as we're figuring all this out. So I thought, okay, I got to that point. Then I'll do a quick, back to Abundance, a project I did in 1998 to 2003, which was about money in America. And Amy Petrin and I worked on it together in Burlington, Vermont, and it was on 6 other sites. And it was, I interviewed about 30 multimillionaires and about 30 minimum wage workers all around the country in twos in each location, though not at the same time, and asked them how much is enough. How much is enough? What would be enough for you? What's your earliest memory connected to money in any way at all? And I led, over those 4 years, about 5,000 people in, actual workshops, sitting in the same room with me, talking. And the people involved were from the complete spectrum, from people who were here without papers, who were earning, $50 a week for about, 60, 70 hours work, and people who were, had $1 million in assets. That was as high as we got in those kinds of groups, except when they were in the theater groups. Excuse me. And so I figured out how people could talk with each other about something as challenging as money was for people to make what I call refrigerator poems. So people made little poems, kind of those magnetic things on your refrigerator, right? Like haiku, but I don't want to insult haiku, which is a sobering, amazing art form, right? So I said refrigerator poems. So people made poems about their earliest memories and shared them, and just that exercise in every one of the 5,000 people allowed them to talk from a place of honesty. It allowed them to show themselves in a way that we just don't get to do in terms of who they are. It allowed them to hold contradictions, which I think is essential for where we're headed and kind of who we are. Just more elegantly hold contradictions and the contradictions that we're all living with. And it allowed them to have some sort of connection to hopefulness, which was also essential. I think we need that. I think it's an inherent part of who we are to be hopeful. And I think it's, you know, we're all battling whatever battles we battle to keep a hold of that in these times. And so when Abundance was over and we did a 7-city theater tour and all that, I asked myself, well, people asked me, what'd you learn? And I learned in the end, the thing I really learned was that when people make art, they can do those things, those 4 things, and a lot more, and that everyone can do it. Because every single person, whether they were homeless, whether they were a millionaire, whoever they were, I got to interview captains of industry. They all did it, and it all had that same effect. So I thought, who could use this in the coming time? And I thought municipal governments. This is why I went back. Now we're back to municipal governments. So I moved to Portland 4.5 years ago. I got invited, we won't get into that story, by the city to actually come and try this on them, that they would be the pilot city. And so I've been working with the workers in the city of Portland for 4.5 years, and the police have been writing poems. Probably, at least some of you have seen the police poetry calendar. We have 2 of them here, or I have 2 of them here. We? Who is we people?
It's we the people.
It's we the people. And it was as hard to have the police write poetry as you can imagine. I said the second year we did it, once they realized that it didn't turn them gay, twice as many.
To see what happened first.
They did. They were like, you first, you go write poetry with that woman. Once they realized it did not turn them gay, over twice as many guns. Yeah, over twice as many wrote the next year. But what this is yes, it's a great art project, but that actually isn't what it is. It's actually identifying critical issues in municipal government and then designing an art project to address them. So when I got here, the police had extremely low morale. That's a very expensive problem. It's expensive for the officers who are likely to take it out on addictions or take it out on their family or on themselves. It's expensive for the city because the officers are likely to take it out on poor people and people of color, like people they feel they can kind of get away with, who are less likely to, you know, for them to get in trouble for mistreating. And it's an expensive problem in morale. It's an expensive problem. And so the police poetry calendar was a very, very serious effort to directly address that. And to get their agreement was challenging. And great stories, a million of them. But about a few months after I got here, completely changed my life, right? Moved to Portland, Maine, left New York City. The city had the largest round of layoffs they've ever had. And they laid me off. And people said, how can they lay you off? You're paying your, Nathan Cummings Foundation is paying your salary. And I'm like, I don't know, but they did, you know. And so they laid me off, but there was a month and a half before I had to leave, right? I was supposed to leave at the end of May. And so during that month and a half in City Hall, I noticed people would like walk by and all, no one ever talks to me. Now they do after, it only took 3.5 years, but I say well worth it. But people would look at me like, really like this, like what? You know, and it took me a while to notice, or somebody would like walk at this and like, and I said, why are they looking at me now? You know, like I'm not doing anything to them. And I realized, oh my God, somebody's fighting for me. Oh my God, they're looking at me with a big bubble over their head that's like, who the hell is, why are they fighting for her, right? And I was in construction for 20 years, so I know and love white working class men like my, you know, like my heart. And I thought, oh my God, they're looking at me so weird, it has to be the cops. Who haven't written one poem? Well, they did write one poem, which is called My Balls Are Blue, My Balls Are Blue. And they read it. They read it with, well, actually it goes, the sky is blue, the ocean's blue, my balls are blue. My uniform's blue, the cruiser's blue, my balls are blue, my balls are blue. My balls are blue, my balls are blue, my balls are blue, my balls are blue. And then we did a roll call, right? Totally serious. They go, Sergeant, I'm not going to say his name, but Sergeant, I believe you have something. And this is the first roll call I've ever been at. So I'm sitting there in the back, you know, like where you are in the yoga class, like, oh, let me be in the back. And he gets out, and he's like, you know, the sky is blue, you know, my uniform is blue, my balls are blue, my balls are blue. So everyone's acting like this is normal. And I'm like, this is working. So actually, they had written a poem. But anyway, so I realized they're fighting for me, and I realized in that culture, there is a profound, profound ethic. And that is, you know, and if you don't mind me using the F word, it's like, we may never write a fucking poem, but you are not taking our fucking poet. Right? And the police were actually getting, they were losing sworn uniformed officers in that layoff, and did. And they took their time to fight to have me not laid off. So that's kind of how it began. And I'm going to read a poem by, a part of a poem by, he was a lieutenant when he wrote his first poem, and now he's acting police chief, Mike Sawchuk. I said, Mike, did you ever think it's because he goes, don't go there. This poem is on the back of the first year's calendar. It's called Fishbowl. People stare, always staring. We like it. The uniform, the badge, the justice. We hate it. The computer, the pen, the law. This isn't what we thought. I want black and white and in trouble by gray. I have handcuffs, but I'm reluctant to use them. What will they say about me tomorrow in the light? We like it. The uniform, the badge, the justice. We hate it. The computer, the pen, the law. So we're going to play a
That's our police chief, huh?
That's our police chief. He was a poet the next year as well. And
Was James ever?
we'll talk.
The answer is no.
James and I, we hit it off, but he, I called him at a bank, I called him once, right? And I'm like, James, you know, Police Chief Craig, we're going to press tomorrow. We need a photograph from you by noon tomorrow. He goes, I'm on a bank robbery. And I'm like, is the robber still there? So we had a complicated relationship. We hit it off, and I'll tell that story in a minute. So, okay, so who's doing the lights?
Wait, sorry. Nice sunset.
In terms of the valuation, we actually used that $5,000 plus the imaginary $5,000, which was my time, to interview, do an hour to an hour and a half interview with every single one of the officers that were involved in that project to deal with low morale. And 83% of them reported that it significantly impacted and improved their morale. Just to get you a sense of kind of how it gets thought about, we mailed a copy to everyone's home, because if you give an officer a copy of the calendar, they're going to throw it in the trunk, even if they like it, right? And it'll never see the light of day. And we wanted it to be up on their family's wall, so that for an entire year, that's why we made it a calendar, not a book or something else, was to say, there it is, that's what your mom is doing, that's what your dad does, right? It's there. That's how we're writing in dentist appointments and baseball games. So So that was that project, and now if we go to, great, thank you, perfect. Oh, I'm the one controlling this now, aren't I? Excellent. So here it is in writing, the powerful resource that comes from direct creative engagement. Here's the challenge. This is the project I just talked about, the low morale. This was the strategy. I can quote another poem, the police, and you know, we're all people. We know how much we hate things. They hated wearing the hat. They hated. They were under absolute orders to wear their hat at all times. And one of the officers wrote in the poem, and we intentionally put it up in one of the early pages. This is the poem. The title is, I Do Hate the Hat. Okay? That's the title of the poem. And the poem is, when it's a child, someone harmed, I take it off. And the hat policy was changed as a result of that poem. And so that's a very, to many of us, kind of minor, but not to the cops. Not having the option to put their hats on and off, that was big. So, hello. Okay. We did a lot of civic engagements. It took 3 months for me to, I told the poets, I mean, it was interesting working with the artists, right? And they were very, very thoroughly selected. You know, you can't be it. If you're an artist working with municipal workers, they're it, right? The municipal workers are it. And we had lots of funny stories about working with them, but half of them didn't believe that, they thought it would be okay to talk to the officers, their poetry partners, about doing a poetry reading, and I said, not a word, not a word. So 3 months later, I actually called Mike, driving back from Providence, and said, I have good news and bad news. And he's like, what's the good news? I said, there's an opportunity to actually engage like a couple hundred Portland citizens in kind of in-depth conversation about policing and police work in a way that really has never happened. And he goes, in the bad news? And I said, it involves the poetry reading. So this was the fifth one they did. And they all, so this was at One Longfellow Square, but you can see they actually they had no idea. They didn't know how powerful art was, right? I mean, some of them make art. The first officer killed who helped make the calendar even happen. It turned out at his funeral, his wife told his best friend, Lieutenant Price, that Rob wrote poetry in secret, and that's how it happened. And Lieutenant Price said, I just found something out from Carol. Rob wrote poetry, and I was like, gotcha. Got you to the left, got you to the right. You're going to write poetry to raise money for Rob's family, right? And it's going to improve morale while that's happening. But, and this is about kind of embedding yourself in a culture, right, and in a community. So then another project is with the Public Works, Public Service Department, which when I started was called Public Works, and they have a really high incidence they did back in 2007, 2008 of racial discrimination lawsuits from worker to worker, right? Very expensive problem to have, right? If you even, and I went to Corporation Counsel and I said, I hear that there's been a lot of discrimination lawsuits within the department and from outside of the department. They go, we won every one. And I was just like, explain what winning means to you. Like, how do you win? That means you only spent $50,000, right, on fighting it, or you didn't have to pay $250,000. So we had workshops with them and had storytelling, and I tried, it's a vastly white department, very few people of color in the department, and that's true of the city workforce in general. But we went around and told heritage stories to try to kind of weaken the confusions around whiteness as an identity and really help clarify that you're Greek, you're Italian, you're Russian, you know, you're Welsh, you're Scottish, you're Native American, you know. And so they started telling those stories with each other, and then Daniel Minter, who many of you know, was our artist on that project, and he came in and they did blocks. They carved blocks with their own heritage stories and made basically a kind of rubber stamp dictionary that they could share and use. So it was about their work and about their heritage.
Daniel's teaching in the
yeah,
illustration
department
now. Finally,
now,
we got
right?
it back up.
So we couldn't afford it, but the best idea we had, and these prints, there's these beautiful prints prints that hang all over the city now in the public staff places, because this project is really for the workers, right? I mean, it's had an impact on the public. But we couldn't afford this, and I couldn't figure out how to afford it. We tried every which way. But it was a great idea that you all would, for 3 days or 5 days, you go to your coffee shops and you get a cup that had their prints and their name and what they did and what they liked about it, you know. So we have the picture. And then Elizabeth Jabbar, another incredible artist who also teaches at Beck as the head of was the head of the Prince Department. I don't know if she's still with. She might have given that lovely job.
I think she's still chairing.
Okay, she's still chairing. But anyway, she worked, it's called Ties That Bind, the Department of Health and Human Services. And we worked with Barron Center, and we worked with the Immigration and Refugee Services, and this is one of Elizabeth's prints, and they made many. There's a really great show that we just opened Thursday night at City Hall in our gallery. It's a retrospective of all the work, and you're welcome to come. I'd love to give each of you a tour. City Writers Group was open to all city departments to just learn who's out there, right? There's about 1,600 city employees, and I just didn't know, you know, I was doing targeted projects, and I didn't know, like, well, who's out there, right? And what are they thinking? So we did City Writers Group, and Don Burns works, some of you might know him, he's mostly at the Spring Street Garage, but he wrote 2 incredible poems. One, Livery, that ends, I do what Thomas Wolfe said was not possible. I take care of what lets you go home again, or something. Right? And so this is, if you're waiting for the elevator at parking Spring Street Garage, you'll see this on the wall. And it's also when you pay if you're disputing a parking ticket, you'll see it in City Hall. Don just came and read this poem Thursday night. And this is the gallery we have, which you're welcome to visit. That happens to be Elizabeth looking at it. Here's Craig. So odd, this. I just want to say something about evaluation. You know, you look for indicators, and now that Chris Dwyer has really worked me over, we've become the poster child of arts evaluation around the country, and go and get to give workshops. But here, this is the janitor's door. This is, we have all these photographs are hanging permanently in the police station now that the officers took and the local professional photographers took. They're partners. But here we are with the janitor's door in the police station, right? And you can see like several indications that the work has been posted. It means something. So this is kind of like your kind of bottom line indication that you're on the right track. That it's having that effect in the culture. Here's Ben Diaz, who works as in both fire and police, looking at some of the photographs on the wall. And then the last, for reasons we haven't found nothing. Is that it? Is that it? Or did I just miss it? Anyway, some of you from Portland may remember that a year and a half ago there started to be repeated, not all of them were reported in the press by the way, repeated incidents of youth throwing bottles and rocks at police officers and at city employees, at public service workers, and it was escalating, and it was in response to the killing of David O'Cott, a young student East man who did have a gun, but was killed by the police and had a long history with them. And it spread like wildfire, the idea that the police were assassins and they were murderers and Mecca students and USM students. I mean, it was a real good education to me about something, to see how fast people decided that the police were murderers and assassins and had shot an unarmed man and killed him. And so the chief asked if I would, and this again is a huge indicator, because ultimately the idea is that they figure out how to use art for themselves, right? That they figure out their own projects. So he called and asked if I could write and direct a play, and I'm not even sure he even knew that that was my background, with officers to do for high school students about their jobs. And I said, only if I'm allowed to work with the officers who would be likely to cross the line. Because I'm not your PR agent, right? Unless we're actually making real change in the police department, and there are officers who cross the line, then it's a great PR job, right? And not that it's not needed, but that's kind of what it is. So anyway, we had a great, funny conversation where I said, I don't know what you want me to call them. I'm in his office, right? There's an officer with us. And I go, I know the word isn't rogue. He goes, rogue? Rogue? No, it's definitely not rogue. And I said, and I'm sure it's not outlaw. Outlaw! I said, so what is the word? Well, how are we gonna refer to these officers? Because I wanna be on ride-alongs with them, I wanna do workshops with them, and if they are in that play, I promise you, my life, that they will never again cross some line. If they have actually been shown to be themselves in the play in front of these high school students, that line is crossed. And he goes, meatheads, do you want to work with the meatheads? I saw Archie. Just right towards the end here, this is Lines Portland, Katarina Wiesland, who also has taught at Mecca and was in the MFA department, did a project with the lines that were made in the streets, and it became, I interviewed the union, asked me, Local 481 in the city, and the union leaders, and again, you have to have integrity, because people are going to have to tell you things that can't really be shared, you know, around and around and around. This crowd is fine to share this, but that isn't always the case. But they said that yes, we're disrespected by the management, and yes, and I mean, they have a lot of emotions about that. They also said one of the things that breaks their heart is that they're disrespected, that they disrespect each other, that there's a real disrespect among the workforce for each other, right? So this project came to be kind of partnering with Katarina's project that she had already done, and oddly enough, I was already taking photographs, not knowing any of this, of these lines. But so we ended up having this amazing project with a panel where, for those of you who know city workers, 2 of the guys came on their days off back into the city, and they actually were on a panel talking about their work, and it was pretty historic. So the Social Service Division, in response to one poster that came out of the City Writers Group, has asked for their own City Writers Group, and you can imagine they have way stories to tell, right, at this point. We've got 2 main projects coming up, and I welcome any of you to talk to me about it. One is Portland Works, and I tried to figure out there's no kind of structured way that city councilors and city leadership within the city government can actually meet community leaders and form relationships outside of kind of an incident-based, usually an incident-based model, because, you know, where people live is, you know, there's a lot of various forms of segregation, right, that is just kind of a part of this culture right now. And so 50% of city workers and 50% of community leaders, and we're looking for like non-obvious community leaders, not necessarily self-appointed, are going to meet for, and we've had to scale it down because we didn't get a grant, a couple grants we had hoped for. But they're going to meet at this point in 1 year, 2 four-month sessions. And they're going to get to make art. Tony Harbert, Betsy Scholl, Daniel Minter, and Shamu, and Anna Gret Beyer are some of our artists that will be working with them. And our partners are extraordinary, but we won't get into that right now. Another one we got the big bucks for, which, you know, as I said, is like, it's not even half the budget, but that's okay, is for the 5 neighborhoods. And it's just kind of looking, if we're really going into this kind of historical upheaval and chance for like big things to break off and big things to be rethought anew, it seemed very kind of simple that the neighborhoods, and the more they can kind of be self-determined and be in charge and not be incident-based and actually have clearly defined leadership and represent the people in the neighborhood, right? And have a clear sense of their history and pride and unity and like each other and really be committed. So the goals of this project are to have 25 engaged members that reflect the diversity of the residents, have clearly defined leadership, and a plan of action for the next 2 or 3, 5, 10 years, right? And so none of the neighborhoods have people color in them, none of our associations. And several of them, clearly that's an important goal for them. And that isn't just a failure, that's a sign that they could use some help, right? So our partners, Avesta, Portland Adult Ed, has over 1,000 immigrant refugee adult students, and they are our, I said, you are the jewel in our crown for both of these projects actually, because they are going to their staff and identifying those kind of leaders, the people that people go to, right? So not necessarily the ones who are running for office, not necessarily the ones that are the heads of the association, although they're doing an important job too, but the other kind of scale and level of leaders, and inviting them not just to come and participate actually in both of these projects, but also they're tracking them, because that is a huge, huge, huge barrier and jump to cross, is to jump that. So I think there. And in the end, I now get to travel every month to these lovely cities and more to, you know, convince I've been to all these places and met with the mayors and the deputy mayors and the funders and the artists to figure out different combinations, but to figure out how do we, how could your city put this to work? So, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yes.